Alrighty. Daniel, welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. Delighted to have you here today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Lucas. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
You're most welcome. So Daniel is the founder of ShipShape. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my background, I used to work in management consulting, largely in financial services, and always focused on the technology element of it. So I used to get really excited where we're breaking down like asymmetry of information and enabling capital to just move around more effectively and more efficiently. So
Yes.
whether that's so just always found it fascinating the role that technology played in essentially helping money get from where it is today to where it's needed.
Okay, fantastic. That's excellent. And so do you want to expand a little bit about what you're doing at ShipShape, how you came to found your own company after working in management consulting on arguably a very exciting topic. I love sort of capital and capital flows, but appreciate that, the audience, perhaps my parents, may not be as interested.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, just before starting ShipShape, I worked for a year in another startup, and
Okay.
that's actually where I came across the problem that we're now solving. So
Yes.
picture this: so day 2 of new job, like it's a senior position in a fast-growing startup, employee number 8.
Oh, wow.
Day number 2, the CEO and founder says, "Hey, Daniel, do with a hand with our sort of Series A."
Yes.
And being young and naive, I said, "Sure, no problem. Like, which bits of it do you want me to do?" And part of it was actually doing the investor research. And the business, it's a really good idea. So it's a tax compliance automation software, again, financial services focused. But trying to find which investors are interested in tax compliance automation, and a really, really niche part of tax compliance automation.
Yes.
Trying to find which investors are interested in that is really difficult.
Absolutely.
And the tools I had at my disposal, as someone who had no network at the time, the tools that I had at my disposal were Crunchbase, investor lists, and that really wasn't that helpful. I wanted to be able to type in what it was that we were doing and see not just which VC firms, which investment entities were
Yes.
interested in that space, but actually which individual is the best person to try and pick up the phone to get in touch. And none of that existed.
Yes.
And ultimately that helped me to have that sort of like crystallize the idea of, actually, you know what? There's a lot of data out there in an industry that is funding literally the future of innovation.
Yes.
And we're working off of Yellow Pages style solutions for it. It's kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
this is an industry that, from a data structure perspective, is stuck in the 90s, and it's slowing down like the brightest people of our generation.
Yes.
Whether that's like founder side, operator side, or on the investor side, they're spending a lot of time following very like loud signals
Yes.
in a market that's really congested. And so that's what gave me the idea for this. There've been a few other factors. Say I was in lockdown in Wales, my now wife's parents' place.
Yes.
My wife was finishing a PhD. It's an area with huge levels of human capital,
Yes.
and the responses to lockdown were so entrepreneurial. You had people doing like D2C, like food supplies, and
Yes.
improving access to healthcare, like but remotely, and lots of these innovative ideas and startups just being created.
Yes.
But it's really obvious that ultimately, because they didn't have a line in to financial capital, didn't have that network, they're going to really struggle with finding which investors to back that business, that idea. And so that's another huge factor. Like, where there's human capital today, actually there's not necessarily financial capital and access to it. And so if you can essentially offer the world access to who might want to fund your idea,
Yes.
it's something worth pursuing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really love this because it's you had the problem when you were working. You found an idea for the problem, and then as a result of the COVID lockdowns, you validated that problem that others had, and so you were able to kick it off and start building from there, I imagine.
Yeah, we were I think we were quite lucky early on. We got an innovation grant that sort of backed the idea. That was Innovate UK grant, and they're like, okay, you know what, actually you're onto something here.
Yes.
And we're able to progress from like a no code solution. I'm a huge believer in doing things in no code first, so you can validate, are people willing to pay for it before you've got any of the bells and whistles and any of the actual technical capability to automate it. And we basically just built the first version of what we had in an Excel sheet, which just didn't work very well at all. It was not scalable at all. And it didn't really, like, from a data science perspective, it didn't answer that much, but we proved that actually this was a better way of doing things.
Yes, fantastic. That's great. And so, you mentioned that initially you built it out as, say, an Excel spreadsheet with a no-code approach. Are you able to talk about how that then progressed to the product that you've got? Because I think, I'm not sure whether we got introduced by someone or if one of us reached out to each other, but at the time of us meeting, there definitely was a product. So talk to us about how you went from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10.
Yeah, so we ran off the Excel sheet for quite a while. Is the honest answer. So that was that was probably the first 7-8 months of the business.
Yes,
and we managed to essentially to condense down the problem. The problem ultimately is this: if you're going to be a search engine that people can rely on, you want the gap between what happens out there in the world and what your search engine thinks has happened to be as small as possible.
Yes.
And so if you're working off an Excel spreadsheet and you're trying to document everything that's happening in the world of venture capital, which is moving faster and faster, like, if you look at in the last 5 years, like the frequency of transactions is going up.
Yes.
Some of the complexity in the deals and the types of deals that are being done.
Yes.
And the involvement of more and more parties as part of syndicates going in and completing rounds. Like, all of that means that you've got essentially like these sand. We think of like data in the way of like sand dunes.
Yes.
These sand dunes are not static, and you ultimately need to be able to accurately describe, or as accurately as possible, describe essentially, okay, this bit is relevant to you.
Yes.
And you've got to know that that's changing. So for us, we basically have focused on a couple of things. One of which is, how do we find the right grain or grains of sand in that, that mass? And then the second bit is, how do we make sure that we're tracking the right bits at the right time?
Yes.
And so we essentially used data science to sift through millions of pieces of data, whether that's like a tweet, like a news article, podcasts.
Yes.
Like, we transcribe podcasts, and we basically enable you to search through that.
Fantastic.
And because each piece of evidence belongs to a person or to an entity, we can essentially say, all right, you type in something super niche, like, I don't know, like audio technology for podcast studios.
Yes.
You can type that in, and it will surface if there are investors talking about it, and if there are investments that have been made in exactly that search phrase.
That's incredible. I mean, the fact that you're almost able to crawl the internet like Google does. This makes sense why I suppose you brand as a VC search engine, because essentially that's what you're doing. So are you able to talk a bit about the sort of the technology behind that, particularly because there are so many different VCs, they are on so many different channels. How did you build out that approach and start executing?
Yeah, good question. So there are lots of different media sources that you can consider, and largely open source. There are some exceptions to that. So, for example, LinkedIn is not very open source. They make it very difficult to go in and access. We don't do that because ultimately, like, they've said, okay, we're just not going to share that level of data. So we don't do that. But with others, there are APIs that you can go and get that data. Actually, that's I'd say relatively common knowledge, that you can go get the unstructured data.
Yes.
How you then sift through it is, I suppose, the secret sauce.
Yes.
Of like, how do you structure that in a way that doesn't shoehorn you into the same approach to data 10 years on. So yeah, we've had to think really carefully, and a lot of our build time actually has been thinking through like what's the right way to architect that.
Yes.
Because the world is changing all around us. The relationships between entities and individuals in a changing market are also going to change. How do you come up with a system that isn't static?
Yes.
Which means that, you know, in 3 years' time, you ask me who's the best person to go speak with about compound semiconductors, and it might not be VCs at all. It might be that there's an angel syndicate that is the best place to go to for that particular query. So we've had to think about a very fast evolving market.
Yes.
Where how people are marketing their capital and the structures for marketing capital are
Yes.
changing quite a lot.
It's nuts. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So you've spoken about what you're doing. What other tools are there in the market that people could use or compare you with?
Yeah, so we're compared to a number of others that ultimately we think are trying to solve a different problem. So we're not trying to be a really big database of, we're not trying to be a really big database in the same way that a Crunchbase is, or another one is a UK focused one called Bowhurst.
Okay.
And they do a really good job of getting lots and lots of data points in and enabling you to build essentially very, very structured queries based upon filters.
Yes.
And there are definitely advantages to taking that approach. We've started off elsewhere, which in the sense of rather than asking you to choose from a number of 40 tags, like things like fintech or regtech. So the business I mentioned earlier would have fitted in that regtech category. It's really good for getting a lot of companies or a lot of investors that are related to that particular tag.
Yes.
So Crunchbase does that really well. So does Bowhurst. You get a lot of companies very, very quickly.
Yes.
But what you can't do in the same way is you can't access who are the people that are semantically, or who are the people who are closest to that search phrase based upon what they've written and where they've invested. And that's really where there's like a bit of a difference. Like we go off of unstructured data. Again, it's the Yellow Pages model versus Google.
Yeah.
You can search for auto parts dealers in Yellow Pages. What you can't find out is who does the best LED light bulbs for your car.
Yeah.
So again, Google can do that. Yellow Pages can't.
Yes, fantastic. And I like the way that you've referenced semantics, because I think semantics translates into intent. And ultimately, if you're a founder raising, you want to be able to contact the least amount of VCs possible in order to raise the maximum amount of capital possible. And certainly my conversations with founders, they're hitting the phones as much as possible. They're organizing many, many meetings. However, it's very difficult. So if you can solve that problem for them, I think they'd really appreciate it, and they'd have a lot of time placed back into their pocket.
Yeah, I think that's one of the critical reasons and one of the key reasons for starting it is humanity's got a lot of brilliant people with brilliant ideas. And at the moment, the death rate of startup businesses is high.
Yes.
We want to make that number smaller because we want people who've got good ideas, even if they're really niche. And most business ideas these days are niche.
Indeed.
We want them to be able to find essentially their tribe, the people who want to back that as early as possible. Because if you can coalesce support around an innovation or an idea early, actually you're giving it the maximum possible chance of success.
Absolutely.
And so for us, that's one of the ways that we think about it is we can deliver that to founders who can concentrate on a smaller number of much richer, far deeper relationships with investors that really matter for them. And on the other side of that equation, you've got investors who ultimately aren't getting spammed so much. And they're very easily able to tell whether or not someone's done their research or not. If I can go to you and say, hey, I've just read an article that says that you really like exactly what it is that we're doing with ensuring that there's no plastics in the ocean. You're much more likely to respond to me. and pick up the phone, because you can see I've done my research, and also that we've got aligned interests.
Yes.
And that's really what we want to enable.
So the value proposition really is for founders, you're able to help them identify VCs who have signaled either through previous investments or through semantic language or other data points that they're interested in, X, Y, Z niche markets, let's say ESG capital, particularly through data reporting. And then with VCs, you're able to ensure that they're receiving leads from founders in the form of founders that have a much more sophisticated and precise approach, a precision approach, as opposed to a pray and spray, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. In the same way that Google indexes websites, and if you're precise about what it is that your business does on your website,
yes,
if someone signals intent, specific intent via Google,
yes,
and you index well, actually, yeah, that lead will come to you.
Indeed.
And so we're in the same way that Google indexes websites, we're indexing investors and their investments, and that is the business. It is enabling capital to market itself better because it hasn't been able to do that historically.
Fantastic. Love it. So these are some really key problems that you're solving. So the big question really is how do you monetize? Who's paying for all of this value?
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned at the start, as we were coming in, investors actually at the start correctly questioned our approach to monetization. So there are we're in an industry where the incumbents make money from subscriptions. So they'll charge founders less, they'll charge enterprises more, and the enterprises get more product. And that's just the way that this industry has worked.
Yes.
We're not interested in doing that. We're interested in opening up access to founders and opening up a new channel essentially for VCs and other investors. We actually don't make money from either side of that via subscriptions. So by using our search engine, we actually pick up the intent and other key data points as well.
Yes.
So those data points are worth something because for the first time ever, we're able to say, actually, you know what, the demand for capital in the UK for compound semiconductor related technology businesses was 200 million. And what's really interesting about that is you've got VCs at the moment and investors at the moment who are deploying cash and capital into areas that they think are trending, but isn't necessarily correlated to where there's demand for capital. And that's really valuable data. So
absolutely.
There's some valuable data there for investors, for government, for accelerators, regional bodies, etc. But there's also really valuable data about startup businesses who are at a very key part of their journey and ultimately could probably benefit from some services, especially those services that are being offered in a way that helps them extend runway.
Yes.
So if you're a founder raising funds, you're always thinking about runway. How long have we got?
Yes.
And if someone like a Google Cloud, for example, comes along and says, hey, we've got $100,000 equivalent in cloud credits to give you, that's really valuable. And what's great there is that we're able to say to Google Cloud, hey, there's a startup here that might well go far.
Yes.
They want to raise X amount of money. At the moment, they're fundraising. So you've got really critical business context there as Google Cloud to say, here's a way that we can help and build a relationship for the long run. And that's ultimately the business in many ways. It is we're getting the ability to deliver highly qualified leads to these companies that ultimately want to be commercial partners of startups as they go through the next part of their journey.
Yes,
and that's the value. Like we're helping businesses find each other without needing to go to like expensive conferences and or host dinners, etc. Where you've got law firms, accountants, banks, revenue-based finance firms. They're all trying to qualify new business, And it's really difficult to do that in a digital way today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this reminds me of a few companies I came across a couple of years back. They were company formation agents, and then they then had leads which were new companies, not necessarily in with the same growth potential as, say, new startups that are going to be funded by VCs. However, there definitely were businesses who were picking up the phone to try and contact them, because these new businesses then would require, let's say, insurance. They would require a bank account. They might eventually start requiring payee in order to do payroll services to pay their employees. So it's it's, I guess, a sophisticated approach following the same concept. Anybody can go to a company's house and open up, a business. The company will be formed. Certainly not anybody can raise a whole lot of money from VCs. And so those leads are much harder to come by for, let's say, a specialized lawyer or, a Google Cloud. So thank you very much for explaining that.
No, it's true. And look, for full frankness and honesty, like we want this to remain free.
Yes.
To the ecosystem and to the wider world as well. We do need to finance it. And this to us felt like ethically and morally the best way of doing that, because there's no obligation for anyone to say yes.
Yes.
But if you're being offered a service that's relevant to you at that point in time, actually you've got a much higher chance of that actually being to your benefit at a point in time, rather than no one wants to get spammed by, for example, recruitment firms. You don't want to get spammed by them. But if one comes in at the right point in time and says, look, we're just here to build a relationship, recognize that you're still raising.
Yes.
It's a very, but have you thought about your first 100 days? What does your talent plan look like for after you've done your raise? Because that's a question that your investors are going to be asking you. We can help you. We can sit down with you and help you do that.
Yes.
And that's in the same way that we're reducing noise between startups and investors.
Yes.
We're also helping reduce noise between B2B businesses and ultimately their hopeful clients.
Yeah, fantastic. No, very good. And I think, the monetizing the data approach is one that, many of the most successful tech companies have followed. I think Amazon's percent of revenue that's generated from advertising sales is around 10%, thereabouts. Same for a couple of others in the industry like Google. eBay, Instacart, Alibaba, all of them, they do it. Instagram, you type in something and up comes an ad. This is the way that the market is working.
Yeah.
So Daniel, I guess a big question, we've understood what the current focus is, the current value proposition. What's next on the roadmap?
Good question. Yeah. So it's really exciting. Some of the things that we've got planned to come in. So, because we're relatively new, we've had to choose where to focus and where we're deliberately not going. So, an area that we know that we want to include and that others currently include is essentially what size checks do VC firms write. So we are. We've got no surprise here. We've got we're basically incorporating lots of open source data.
Yes.
For helping to inform founders. Okay, which VCs write checks in the range that I'm looking at? Because at the moment we're basing it off of, do you care about the thing that I'm doing?
Yeah.
We've not yet got built right the way through the ability to say you're raising the right amount for this VC firm, and they also care about your value prop. At the moment, we're relying on users doing that research for themselves. Yeah. But we are getting rid of hundreds of days worth of research time because of the amount of data we're going through. So that's one. Another one is there's a really cool company which no doubt lots of your listeners will have already heard of, called Landscape, and they do VC reviews. Yes. And so they let founders give anonymous reviews on VCs.
Okay. Wow.
And set up by a brilliant founder called Jay Perkins, and we'll be incorporating landscape review ratings into the search
Oh,
engine,
fantastic.
so that you get additional information about, are they the type of investor that you would want on the cap table?
Yes, excellent. Yeah, I think, ticket size and reviews of the VCs will be super important. First one in terms of qualifying them as to, are they going to give us enough money? And secondly, in terms of, actually how should we approach them based upon other founders' experiences? Because it's all well and good to speak to founders of portfolio companies within the VCs, but when you're approaching 80 different VCs, realistically, are you going to have a coffee with each one of the VC's portfolio companies?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really important role as we see it in the ecosystem to, like, how can you, in a world in which the advice and the knowledge of the ecosystem is bottled up at the moment in these very tight knit, hard to crack into sort of circles. How do you share that?
Yeah,
and I think that's it's another area of it's an area of similarity and that we've got with some of the there are some other like companies that are just emerging into the space that are like looking to shake things up, and I think that's a common thread throughout is people want to be able to share more information as to who to go to and why.
Yes. Yeah, fantastic. Look, Daniel, thanks so much for telling us about ShipShape. Any sort of tips or key takeaways you'd like to share with founders or the general community based upon your interactions both with founders and VCs across the board?
In terms of a key takeaway and it's a piece of advice. One is, if you found an investor that cares about what you're doing, even if they're not necessarily writing the right size check for you right now, you want to be building that relationship with an eye on 12 months, 24 months ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never too early to start building those relationships is I suppose one key takeaway. And the other one is, do your research.
Yeah,
it always pays to be going into a room, into a meeting with an investor where you've done your research, because even if you've done your research and it said that they're a fit and they turn out not to be, they'll at least understand why it is that you thought that they were.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Therefore you move into that other category. So I think VCs have got a few categories, one of which is we've progressed to the next conversation. The next one is you're not the right fit for us, but you are a potentially good fit for elsewhere. I want to open up my network to you. I think the last one is not a good fit, didn't do the research, I'm not going to help you onwards.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, like, lots of VCs want to pay it forward, but they are also conscious of ultimately the value of their reputation, and part of their reputation and the value is what's the quality of deal flow that they bring to their network within VC.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, fantastic takeaway. Thank you very much for sharing it. Anything that you want to add as a closing remark?
Yeah, I mean, founders, accountants, anyone that a founder is asking for help with fundraising, they can now access our search engine for free. Yes. So that's at shipshape.vc. And if you create an account, then you get unlimited searches. So fantastic. We're here to help the community.
Excellent. Alrighty. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Lucas.